Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about the practice of non-subtle energy medicine. Actually, it expands to be much greater than just that, because when most people think of energy medicine, they think about usually physical or mental healing. But what about jumping into something even more dynamic, where you get to have the full expression of what one's self is as the subtle energy begins to work through you in creative ways, such as the arts, music, even athletics? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today are two very special guests. They're both founder of the Keeney Institute for Healing in New Orleans. Our first guest has been spending more than 40 years doing healing lectures and also studying healing for people throughout the world, along with his wife, who is a traditional healer and senior research fellow at the University of Louisiana. I'd like to welcome both Hillary and Bradford Keeney to the Beyond 50 radio program. Thank you both for joining us here today.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
Thanks, Daniel. Good to be on the show.
Seiki, this is something that I haven't heard of before. Seiki Jutsu, exactly. Now tell us about this. This is a Japanese form of subtle energy. Tell us what this is all about.
Well, yeah, it's exciting that Seiki is a word that's not familiar to people, because it brings something that's even less familiar, and that is, as you mentioned, non-subtle energy. Because typically when people talk about subtle energy, or energy at all, they're talking about something you sort of have to believe that it's happening to you, hence the word subtle. But when it's non-subtle, you know something's happening because it feels like you plugged into an electrical current, as if you just plugged into the wall outlet. But this is a spiritual current. It's something that you feel and makes you want to shout, makes you want to jump, just like the Blues Brothers when they went into that sanctified church in that movie, and couldn't help but seeing James Brown be the pastor and having everybody singing and shouting and running down the aisles. Well, lo and behold, you can find that kind of energy in other places in the world, but it's been perhaps the last big secret to spirituality. That electrified spirituality is an alternative to, shall we say, non-plugged-in forms of practice. And one of the places it's been hidden is in Japan. And this is rooted to long ago Shintoism, shamanism, and went through the days of samurai and was most beautifully held by probably the greatest healer of the last century in Japan, Akuko Osumi Sensei. And I wrote her life story and lived with her for a while, and she passed that lineage on to me, and now Hillary and I are teaching it, as well as other forms of non-subtle energy medicine that go all the way back to the oldest culture in the world in Africa, the Bushmen. Mm-hmm. People know them perhaps from the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. But the gods were crazy, and that's a good way of saying the gods love to make fun. And I think making human beings was part of their fun. And the truest, oldest, if you wish, theology is that of play. And if you really play and allow life to tickle you, you start laughing, and that gets a giggle, turns into a wiggle. You feel the energy, you wake up, and you might start singing and dancing. There you are again with James Brown and back to the samurai of Japan.
Hillary, you sound like you're ready to add something to this.
Yeah, well, just to add to what Brad said, many people have heard of what in the West now is called so-called energy medicine, but it's important to know about Seiki. Seiki really translates as a non-subtle life force or a supercharged chi. And it has been in Japan actually originally referred to as the fountain of youth, because what's interesting about Seiki Jutsu is that it's not only a hands-on healing practice that involves a master of Seiki Jutsu putting their hands on and transmitting the life force, but it also is a daily self-healing practice that is really centered around effortless, spontaneous movement. And so the difference between Seiki Jutsu and perhaps all the different fields of energy medicine is that it really encourages people to just allow their bodies to come alive, to nurture playfulness, spontaneity and improvisation, as you said, that extends beyond just what we would consider the physical body, but it promotes improvisation and spontaneity and liveliness in other parts of our life, including our creative gifts and our talents and various forms of performance and expression.
Now, it was interesting because as I was reading through the book, Seiki Jutsu, I was realizing, I've experienced this, but I've never been able to put my finger on exactly what this was. And one interesting example that I can share was years back. It was interesting because I was actually reading the works of Carlos Castaneda. And there was a particular point where he was being taught by Don Juan, where they were on the porch of some place that they were out in the middle of the desert. And he was suggesting, Don Juan was to Carlos, that you need to find your particular spot with which you can rest, and this is where you'll garner and gather energy. And he says, but only you'll know where that spot is, and once you do, you will never find a place of more safety and comfort and energetic expression ever than you will in this particular place. And what was fascinating is that Carlos tried, as I think a lot of us, especially in the West, tend to do, as he began to use deductive reasoning and process of elimination, trying to find this particular spot on this wooden porch so that he could actually go to sleep, and found himself doing this for hours trying to figure this out. But as he finally discovered where this place was, it was almost at a point where he basically released, he surrendered the fact of needing to figure it out, and there it was all of a sudden. Now, how that relates to the story that I have quickly was there was a time when a friend of mine and I were actually playing some basketball at an outdoor court. And interestingly enough, it was at a little grade school, and the basketball, the rim, the whole thing was, sitting in the cement, and there was the cement court. But the court slanted downward. So you actually were, if the further away you got from the basket, really the higher up the rim became because of the slant. So it wasn't an even court. And so we were kind of standing there, and the sun was about to go down over the hillside ridge. So it was a beautiful evening, but the sun was just about ready to duck down behind that ridge there. And he decided, I just said, at one point as I was trying to share the game of basketball, I said, go ahead and pick a spot anywhere around here, and I'll go ahead and I'll shoot a basket, and then I'll just simply make it. And he says, okay. So he picks a spot that's probably easily about 4.5 feet, give or take, above the top of the key. So you're looking at least a 30-foot shot, give or take. Now, I'm down on the slant, too, so remember, it's not an even trajectory. I'm actually shooting upwards at a higher rim. So I began to think about this Don Juan situation, and I kept looking up at the sky and looking at the sun. I'd dribble the ball for a second, and I just kind of feel the moment. And this is actually what happened. All of a sudden, the shot just released itself. I wasn't even there anymore, and I literally felt a slight blackout. As soon as I came to, the only thing I could see was the ball hit the bottom of the net. My friends stand there astounded, and I couldn't even describe what had just happened. It just let itself go. And you talk about that in the book, especially in the classic book, Zen and the Art of Archery, Eugene Herrigal, great classic, where it says the snow releases itself off the leaf of the bamboo, and that's much what Seiki Jutsu is all about. It's about true spontaneity that's beyond something that you can actually explain.
That's so right, Daniel. And two things I want to say that your story brought up is Seiki Jutsu really is beyond the act of reasoning or the experience of thinking things through or trying to figure them out. It isn't a spiritual or health practice that involves different forms of thinking or working with the mind. It really is a whole body, full immersion in spontaneity and improvisation that is akin to, shall we say, a supercharged extreme flow experience. And so what we do when we work with Seiki Jutsu is try to nurture and foster those kind of experiences in multiple different aspects of our life, including throughout the day, so that we have a particular practice and relationship to being recharged, to entering the flow experience, to getting out of our mind and getting into our body, and entering what we call the Seiki stream.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bradford, I understand that this was passed on to you from the sensei, and that you actually found yourself in some difficulties, but there were many people that were trying to present themselves to actually take on the torch, if you will, and wondering why, of all people, you were the one to get it. As it was explained, it's because it's your destiny. So Seiki Jutsu is a way of discovering one's destiny, isn't it?
I mean, that's one way of saying it, but I think I also want to add your teaching in reference to the Castaneda story, that when you purposefully and consciously use willpower to try to figure it out and try to make it happen, it just doesn't happen. And if you can learn to be as free and empty, and those words, of course, what do they mean? If you're trying to consciously figure them out, you won't figure it out. But if you try to make yourself more available to make life, or to have life make you happen, rather than you make life happen, then spontaneity has more room to inspire and move you. And so people who are with good intentions, trying so hard to be healthy, trying so hard to find God, trying so hard to find their power spot, trying so hard to find bliss and prosperity, what short circuits all of that is the trying so hard. And yet being told that just means you're going to try hard to not try hard, so you get into that crazy loop. And so the teaching of Seiki Jutsu and the Kalahari Bushmen and all non-subtle life force releases of basketballs from impossible spots on the court involve putting yourself in the position to trip yourself to have life move you. So this is really a teaching of spontaneity and bringing nothing to the table.
Now, what's noted that our listeners should come to understand, too, is, we also live in a culture that we love to follow gurus. And so then we get concerned about whether or not whatever it is we're pursuing through their teachings, whether we're doing something right or not. You take a look at YouTube, and one of the biggest searches on YouTube videos is how to do something. It's almost as though we forgot that life can just show us whatever we need to know if we would just kind of get out of the way and let it happen.
Right. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was in elementary school, we had a true recess. That meant the bell rang and you ran out in the play yard and you could do whatever you wanted.
Right.
Now it's organized and purposeful. And so the most important class, arguably, in education has been eliminated, the class in which there is no purpose. And so we're overly driven to achieve goals of spirituality as well as success in the business place and at home and in relationship. And we need more space to not practice. In fact, one of the greatest music teachers, she taught Keith Jarrett and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock. She taught one lesson. That is, play one note effortlessly and never practice. Because if you practice, you sound like practicing. You want to sound like you're musical. And that's really what's gone awry with, perhaps, dare we say it, most of the whole, if not the whole, of spiritual traditions. Everyone's teaching a practice where we just simply need to learn to voice effortlessly 1 second of natural life and then allow more of that to enter the stage.
Hillary, your thoughts on that?
Well, as I'm listening to Brad, I just feel moved to say that what has been the biggest gift for my life about Seiki and the practice of Seiki Jutsu is that rather than it being a particular discipline or skill, that it is a way of inviting the whole body to participate in a retuning and a recharging and a rejuvenation. I used to be, for a long time, I practiced meditation, Zen Buddhist meditation for many years. And what I found with the struggle of that is the same as what many people find, which is that you have moments of feeling calm or peaceful, but you have the whole discipline of sitting still and constraining the body, and it's very easy, as someone is telling you, to not pay attention to your thoughts, to, of course, get very hung up on your thoughts and what you're thinking.
It's like they come along with grappling hooks almost, huh?
Exactly. And the beauty of Seiki Jutsu is that it involves the whole body, and rather than being a practice per se, even though we sometimes talk about it that way, it is actually, as Brad said, a recess. And so traditionally, when Osumi Sensei would teach her clients to do the Seiki exercise, she would suggest that they sit on a special bench called a Seiki bench and allow their body for about 20 minutes a day to move spontaneously. And this is a way of what she called milking the life force. And it's amazing that something so simple that a child can do. When you look at children or babies, they're moving spontaneously all the time. They're bobbing, they're rocking, because this is a way that they recharge themselves and keep themselves full of life. But we're adults, we become very still. And when we try to relax, it's sort of strange, but we have these very purposeful relaxation exercises. And so Seiki is really an augmentation to that. And as you learn to experience your body moving spontaneously and allow that Seiki or life force to surge within you, and this includes vibrating, bobbing, rocking, slow movements, still movements that are just slight, bigger movements, and it also includes the voice, so making vibratory sounds. And that when that happens, it's amazing how it recharges the body, and it's something that I find extremely helpful to do throughout the day, so that it almost becomes as if the Seiki, as you start doing it more and more, is like a switch that you can turn on and is available to you. So the next time you're feeling under the weather, or the next time you feel some stress or some confusion, or you just need to break out, you don't even have to think of it like a particular practice. You can just turn on that switch and give yourself a little shake or a little wiggle or a little rock. And your body then has the wisdom of the Seiki flowing within you. And it's incredible how this can become something that pervades not only just a physical exercise or something that you do with yourself, but other areas of your life as well.
So in other words, birds do it, bees do it, even Japanese executives do it. So now let's do it. Let's all fall in love with life.
That's right.
Now, one thing to be noted, too, for the listeners out there is the simplicity of the practice. This isn't something that's overly complicated, but very simple. And as the saying goes, if it were complicated, we would understand it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we work with people, and this is also how Osumi Sensei worked, is that it is helpful. And we do this when we do workshops and private sessions, and we show people and tinker and experiment together with what the practice looks like. And we also do hands-on work where we transmit and share the vibration of Seiki into another person. So it is helpful to have someone who is a Seiki master or teacher be like a kind of improvisational movement coach that can help foster this practice. And so we have been experimenting with Seiki because, as Brad said, part of our life's work is recognizing that Seiki Jutsu is a practice from Japan, but this same relationship to non-subtle energy work exists in Africa and the Caribbean and other places, and we would like it to be brought more into the other concepts and ways of working with energy that we currently find. And so it's helpful when you can work with other people and work with a master so that you can have a lifelong relationship to Seiki.
That's important to bring back the word master. We sort of beat it up and threw it away and said everybody's a master, and it's really not true. Because if you go to Juilliard, it's quite clear there are master teachers and of acting and so forth. But, of course, the nonsense is that nobody builds a religion and deifies, a jazz performer or an opera singer. But they need the expertise that's been granted to them to help them move along, because it's just so easy to get lost on your own. So this is an important point I think Hillary's making, that good teaching is a gift to anyone who's trying to bring forth all that lies within, that's wanting to come out but is impeded by all the nonsense or assumptions or purposeful or willful or trying too hard stuff.
Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing, too, it wasn't too long ago, it seems, I was reading about the oldest average living people on Earth were in the mountains of Japan, and I kind of wondered as I was reading this whether this might also be one of those components that has something to do with that.
Very interesting. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
it certainly could be. I mean, that it was certainly there, and we know that prior to World War II, that all of Japanese medicine was non-subtle. That the form that was popularized, which is before the letter S, R, when you go from Seiki to Reiki, that was an invented form to be made accessible to the West. And so it became calmed down because they sort of thought that Westerners would be like overwhelmed by something that looked too alive. And but prior to the end of the war, the early energy traditions were pretty electric, and after it, old traditions were either forbidden as Western medicine came in, and the conqueror brought its means of hosting medicine, healing, and energy work. So let us remember that old Japan energy work was very different than some of our contemporary fantasies about what it was or is.
The other thing, too, I couldn't help but think about as you were talking about hands-on healing at times in the book was this. The movie The Karate Kid.
Yeah.
And there was that scene toward the end when he's in a match and he gets his leg whacked pretty good where he easily couldn't return back into competition. But he realized he needed to so that he could be square with the guys that have been pretty much tormenting him throughout the story. And so there is, his sensei, Mr. Miyagi, claps his hands together, rubs them, gets the friction going, then lays his hands on the leg, and sure enough is able to heal it long enough for him to go into the final competition and, of course, win the whole match. Is that a form of this?
Why not? I mean, if he,
yeah, I just wondered, because I kept thinking about, wow, this kind of reminds me of the Karate Kid. So
it is such a weird idea when I present to old healing traditions, and the oldest of which is Kalahari Bushmen, as we've mentioned. I mean, we know they're 60 to 80,000 years, and they've been doing it for at least that long because the old rock art shows images of them doing it. To them, it's unimaginable that anyone wanting to help another person through energy or any caring means would not put their hands on another person. So this idea of distant healing or putting your hands off the body, to them is seen as formally, well, shall I say, insane. They just think that people have lost their minds. But we know it's due to cultural taboos and all kinds of strange etiquette and so forth that has resulted in this. But in fact, Osumi Sensei herself said that before you can begin to heal another person, you must first establish a skinship. That is, your touch must become familiar and be accepted and be resourceful. Before then, you can really mediate the energy work. So let's get those hands. People are starving to be touched in healing ways, and people are starving for a good old-fashioned healthy hug, and a fluttering hand that's inspired by the divine is about the best medicine the world has ever offered.
I know that I've suggested many times on the program, especially for people who approach and move beyond midlife, is that you do tend to see a tremendous amount of, I guess, loneliness. People coming out of marriages, whether it's from a divorce or a passing spouse, and they find themselves at those moments where they find themselves alone, almost at times maybe a bit of isolation, and at times perhaps they throw themselves into the work or hobbies, and there seems to be a lack of, as you were talking about, that touch, that feeling of connecting with friends, and they say that people who actually plan things for themselves, to look forward to and also have a lot of dynamic interaction with friends are those that tend to live longer because, there's a place. But I have also suggested that if you're kind of in that situation, one of the things you can do that's extremely inexpensive for your health is go and get a massage at least once or twice a month so that at least you're touched.
Right. We all need vitamin T. If you don't get that touch vitamin, if things go awry, you're just going to feel topsy-turvy in the wrong way. It's just it's absolutely necessary. Or go play with your grandchildren, or wherever people can cross the somatic divide, and get a dog. Go hug a tree. Give somebody a massage, even if you don't know how. You can at least give them a nice head rub. Do anything that's in the tactile dimension is so important, because it is what at least our world and time is so starved for. And we've gotten so crazy with it that we think just the only thing we can do with touch is shake another person's hands, or else it means something what none of us intend for it to mean. But we need that vitamin T. And so, keep prescribing.
And think of this one, too. Here's an interesting one. One of the most consistent answers I've heard to this question is this. When you go to get a haircut, what's your favorite part of the experience? 100% of the time, people love the part where they get shampooed. Massaging the shampoo into the scalp, that nice warm water that flows over your scalp, the drying of the hair. And it's almost like the haircut becomes the anticlimactic part of the whole experience.
It's absolutely true.
Absolutely true.
Some of our students are body workers who give massage, and they're really excited because when we do Seiki with them and teach them about Seiki Jutsu, it's a way for them to be freed of particular modalities and techniques of massage and body work, and instead have a vibratory interaction with another that's more spontaneous, where it really is the vitamin T bringing life to the body. And similarly, maybe we should start a whole school just for hairdressers, where we teach them to have a relationship to Seiki. And wouldn't that be amazing if you had a whole salon where people, perhaps even unknowingly, went to the hairdresser, and when they got their shampoo, they got this life force transmitted into them. I mean, can you imagine how that would wake them up?
Could you imagine also all the clients a particular hairdresser would have after something like that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like, I don't know what it is. Everybody can cut hair as well, but this one does something I just can't even describe it. And that's really the source of Seiki.
I actually went to a hairdresser in Johannesburg who went beyond the 3 or 4 minutes, and it was like a 10-minute head work in which I felt bliss. I said, anybody tell you should be a healer? And she said, all the time. And she was the most booked, and that's why you went. And she later told me that there were clients of hers who came saying, could you just give me the whole time of that head treatment? I don't want my hair cut today.
Wow.
So, I mean, you're addressing something so important. And, let's do it. Let's just start a whole new...
I even had that happen, too. See, here we are sharing experiences that I think a lot of people out there, when they think of something, what we're talking about here about Seiki Jutsu, is the idea that it's complicated, when the reality is it's simpler than you think and more profound, in the results than you could ever imagine. And there was, back to cutting hair again. I remember getting a haircut, and this was some years ago, and when she was done and how they start brushing the hair off your collar and all that, all of a sudden, and I'd never experienced this before, but she started lightly massaging my neck and my shoulders, and I was getting the feeling like it was my wife doing this. I said, boy, if only, And she kept doing it. I was just like, oh, my goodness. It's like, just keep going, Exactly. Boy, what a treatment.
Yeah, and it's so easy to, in our world, to just get totally cut off from our body and go up into our head. And I know it sounds cliche because everyone always talks about that, how do we get out of our head and into our body? But it really happens, and as we age, we just sometimes forget that we have a whole universe, below the neck. And any time that we can have a relationship to that, whether it's both in improvisational movement, but certainly also with any kind of Seiki-filled, lively, vibratory interaction of touch, whether it's at the hairdresser or a friend or someone we know, it really can go a long way in bringing more life to our life and tuning us and recharging us in ways that in some ways we feel are too simple to believe.
Yeah, we just heard too much about long-distance healing. It's time to make it the shortest possible distance.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think, too, we're getting too reliant on technology to allow us to stay in one place, where we can be distanced. And I find the alarming part of the whole thing is I sometimes commute to downtown by bus, and you realize everybody holding a cell phone, here we are wanting to be individuals who are trying to find ways to disconnect and reconnect with people through technology. And it seems to me what we're beginning to release, or at least surrender, is a sense of individual responsibility toward the, I guess I'm trying to think of the right word here, the experience of what it means to connect one-on-one with people. It's sort of like people who decide that now they're single, they want to begin dating again. There's all this online internet dating, and of course the big, I guess, rationale behind that is that, well, you get to know me before we meet. And my feeling is, no, I'd rather meet you and feel, is there that connection, that energetic exchange? You're not going to really feel that over something like the internet.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We need a new T-shirt with the slogan, I'm available for human interaction.
Now, I know you give a great example, or actually several of them, but one that really to note here in your book, Seiki Jutsu, was that into the healing arts we're talking about getting to the level of people who are surgeons, and there was one particular who is a back surgeon, if you remember that. Go ahead and tell us about that one. That one there was kind of eye-opening there.
Yeah, I think. we have several anecdotes, and several of them are similar. So we've actually had 3 clients over the years. All of them were spinal surgeons. One in Brazil, but he trained in San Francisco and was in the United States for a while. One from New England, another from California.
I believe it was the Brazilian surgeon is the one that comes to mind first.
And he like the others actually had himself spinal issues and had gone to surgery and had tried various treatments and weren't effective. But when we worked with each of these doctors, they had spontaneous healings of their spinal situation. And it didn't involve a purposeful adjustment, didn't involve any intentionality, didn't involve let's sit down and doctor it. It was in the spontaneity of our interacting with them and touching them that something transformed that led them to report for the rest of their lives, as far as we know, but for the years that followed, absence of pain. And in the case, I don't know if we wrote this, in the case of that Brazilian surgeon, he became such a practitioner of Seiki Jutsu and allowed it to take him deep into spiritual concerns that it actually charged him and charged his hands. So when he performs surgery, he's actually plugged in to this electricity, which is another fascinating part to the story that we don't always tell.
And that's what I meant, is that he began to say it's as though his hands worked with the wisdom that even his training would never be able to do. They just knowingly went and done what needed to be done, as almost though they were operating on their own. And it just reminded me, of course, that one of many moments that I've had where it just released itself. Just get out of the way and just kind of let the wisdom of the body know what it knows to do through working through spirit. Yes.
Actually, there are 3 great names in the history of medicine when it relates to the pioneer developments of heart surgery. And 2 of those doctors were in Houston. I won't mention his name, but I know for a fact that one, as he got older and so skilled, that he often just closed his eyes and did the surgery.
Wow.
I know that from a physician. So that, again, without him being able to speak the way we are, the spontaneity, this automatism, this access to greater wisdom that conscious mind can deliver, in fact, the latter tends to inhibit, takes place even with car mechanics and surgeons, as well as poets and musicians and school teachers.
Now, there was one that came to mind, and it starts off more or less in the beginning of the book, and that is that a lot of people try to go out, especially in midlife, and rediscover themselves, finding out that here was this whole life they've spent in so-called the first part of their lives or half of their lives, doing things the way they were told they should be done, and realizing they just didn't get the results at least they hoped for. And I think there's an instinct inside of us that begins to awaken that says, what you have been doing has been all wrong. If you would just listen to me, and I know that it's overwhelming the forces such as our parents and our school teachers and our bosses that say, you're just not doing this right, so we conform and we appease, and we find ourselves eventually lost, and now it's being called a crisis, a midlife crisis, if you will. So we seek spiritual gurus and therapists and talk therapy. And one of the things I found fascinating, it would be interesting to see what an experience like this would look like, would be Seiki Jutsu in the realm of talk therapy. And I just cracked up just kind of playing out a scenario. You did what, you little worm? And I imagine a therapist not being so courteous and passive, but actually engaging in a spontaneous way with the person that they're actually in a session with.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you raise that because, as you know, in the book, we spend a whole chapter that brings Seiki Jutsu and working with the non-subtle life force into the talking cure arts, whether you want to call it therapy or coaching, because these things in terms of working with the body versus working in conversation or with mind and emotions have just been too separated in our culture in the way that we approach transformation and healing. And Seiki really comes forward to unify that experience. Mm-hmm. So it matters less whether or not you talk or touch. What matters is that the practitioner themselves, whether they're a surgeon or they are a therapist, is plugged in to the Seiki current. Because when a therapist is plugged into the Seiki current, then that means that that life force, that spontaneity will come forth in their interactions with the client. So what everyone needs is really a therapist that can be plugged in. And then that interaction can be organized by what brings more Seiki to a session. Mm-hmm. And this is as healing as any particular word or schema or whatever the model the therapist thinks that they're following. And so this is where one of the groundbreaking parts of our book is crossing that boundary and saying, whatever you want to think of as energy medicine, when you're working with the life force, it isn't just in the realm of working with the body or having a massage or a vibrational medicine interaction. It's about every single practitioner coming to life and getting plugged into the Seiki current.
And you're right. You come up with spontaneous things you don't expect and don't even understand why you're asking or saying, which might include talking about worms. But you might say, when you go fishing, do you typically use a worm? Actually, what I meant to say is, what do you put on your hook to get caught by something bigger than the limitations of the way you're living your life? On and on this thing goes. And we spent the whole summer in Budapest working with impossible psychiatrically diagnosed cases, so-called, and they were witnessed by doctors, including the director of the National Psychiatry Institute of Hungary. And we saw every range of symptom, from long-term institutionalized diagnosed psychoses to the classic manic depression, all the kind of labels that we don't pay attention to because we just go for the Seiki. And that fills us with an energized imagination that's free to say anything, especially that which we don't understand why we're saying it. And so that's work we're very interested in. We're training therapists in Europe, and we have a training program in Mexico. We've been working with University of Mexico, training their faculty for years. So this is an exciting frontier because there's nothing sleepier than a psychotherapist office. And if anyone needs to be plugged into some electrical current and be inspired by something bigger than a very tiny psychological model, it's the healers of our time who are working in a straitjacket. We need to free the therapist from straitjackets, and then their clients can be freer to have bigger lives.
I think sometimes, too, and it could be maybe some eggshells that I'm stepping on here, when you think of the world of psychology and psychiatry, is that we tend to look at that as a science. And I couldn't help but kind of laugh at one time I was watching the movie Hannibal, fictional character Hannibal Lecter, and she was talking about how Clarice Starling, when she was talking to Barney, who was one of the original people from the original movie, who was sort of one of the sentry or guards, she says, well, Dr. Hannibal, he really didn't consider psychology to be a science. And he says, you're right, he didn't. Dr. Hannibal Lecter, known psychiatrist, did not consider those things sciences. And when you think about it, really, I mean, it is. It's all guesswork and hit and miss. There's nothing scientific about it because everybody is so unique in the way they come with however they are. So,
right. We've been involved in the scholarly side of people helping for all of our lives as well. And one of our main goals is to bring a healing heart to the helping professions. And of course, the idea that psychology is a science, or only a particular definition of science should be the form of legitimacy by which it's assessed, is completely insane. Psychotherapy, we have argued, belongs in the school of performing arts more than it does in any presumed social science or medical science or any form of science. In fact, there was an old professor who said if you have to add the word science to something, it guarantees it's not a science. Political science, economic science, library science, social science. So we're right there with you, and we're ready to crack all those eggs right open. So we don't mind walking on eggshells.
Now, I was going to ask, have the two of you found a challenge in the presentation of this here in the United States? Because, when you take a look at traditional ways of healing in the United States, it seems that you're finding more and more alternative forms, or we can call them ancient forms that are just being reignited again, coming in that are having some tremendous success, especially in areas such as, cancer therapy, but yet they're just being met with such tremendous resistance, and you think to yourself, wait a minute, and so as I've always suggested, as we even talk about this here on the program, is why are we concerned with the modality? Shouldn't we be concerned with the outcome? Isn't that what we're looking for?
Yes, and I think another way to say it is that we need to be as concerned with our experiences that we're having in a healing session, and rather than following a model, I would say it another way and said we should be concerned with whether or not our healing work is filled with Seiki. And this is really the lesson that Osumi Sensei would bring. Is the practitioner, do they have a strong relationship with Seiki? And is the client filled with Seiki? Because from the perspective of Seiki Jutsu, what matters most is that we're plugged in to the life current and that we can feel and experience transformation and rejuvenation and change no matter what modality we follow. So when we teach therapists and clients, we say, you know what? If you feel like you need to use a modality or you want to follow a model, no problem. Just make sure that it's infused with Seiki and comes to life. Because from the perspective of Seiki Jutsu, when something is filled with Seiki, no matter what it is, whether or not, let's even step out of the healing context and say, if you're filled with Seiki, it doesn't matter what you're cooking for dinner. But that's going to be filled with more life and have a sweeter taste and have more life-giving nutrients than any kind of outcome-based study that has no relationship with Seiki whatsoever.
So it's all about what you define outcome to be. For us, it's life. And what Hillary said is the essence. If a session or a radio show or a play or a Sunday morning service or a meeting with your doctor brings more life into your life, then that's the outcome we want. But dare you subject it to a statistical study where the outcome is limited by a questionnaire that trivializes and reduces it to a non-complexity, then you're going to end up having to say, does it make sense for Broadway to have outcome studies? Do you want evidence-based radio hosts?
Who would want to go to a play like that?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same thing I seen yesterday, same as it ever was.
Yes, and for the people listening out there, it's really impossible when you're seeking help to first go through all the psychological and therapeutic journals or even massage journals and wade through whatever outcome studies before you choose a therapist. This isn't really how people have been seeking help and healing for thousands of years. And so we say, let the academics and scientists, if they think they are, that argue over outcome studies. But what's important for the average person is that, as Brad said, they have the freedom to pay attention to what their experience of a particular practitioner is and their experience of a healing session.
Find someone who is electrified, who's filled with life. Because if somebody's plugged in, they can read the phone book, and it's going to be holy. It's going to be sacred. It's going to be transformative. But if you're not plugged in, you could read any poetry, you could read any holy book, and it's going to be dead. So if you're plugged into Seiki, if you're filled with the life force, it's just flowing through you. If you've got soul, if you've got spirit, then all will be well, because it's just going to come out the way it needs to come out, whether anyone understands it or not. Because it's not about the understanding, it's about standing under, being filled with something greater than the limitations of human-produced models that encourage willpower and make it impossible to hit impossible basketball shots.
Not to mention, Dustin Hoffman was right in the movie Rain Man. Read your local phone book. You know, it's a pleasure to have both of you. I know we had an enjoyable conversation last time as we talked the Bushman's Way to Tracking God. And there was a fun story that you share in here in Seiki Jutsu about the movie, of course, The Gods Must Be Crazy. And there was a point where the main character, which was one of the Bushmen, had actually gotten very sick, and it was decided that they had to take him to a hospital some hundreds of miles away. But on the way there, he began shaking and vibrating, and before you know it, by the time he got there, they said, you know, there's nothing wrong with this guy. That sort of came through him.
That's right. And you know what's fascinating? I heard the story from the doctor who treated him, because he accidentally was sitting next to me on an airplane when I was going to South Africa to, to get my ground transportation head up into Botswana and Namibia. So I heard it straight from the physician. And it just left a mystery with the medical science that how could someone just going into an ecstatic state, trembling and sometimes looking like he was convulsing, find a self-corrective way, a self-healing way that defies all medical science explanation. And that reminds me, too, that the star of that show was a wonderful woman who was one of the great elders, one of the strongest healers we ever met. And next year we have another book coming out that's taken 30 years to prepare, because it's based on 30 years of field work, over 10,000 pages of transcribed interviews of all the living healers we were able to find in the Kalahari Bushmen from Botswana to Namibia. And her face is on the front of this book. And in that text, we're just being secretaries presenting the teachings of the world's oldest living spiritual and healing tradition. And, of course, what they have to say today is as relevant as what they have lived for throughout the thousands of years, and it's what we've been talking about. And that is, no matter how impossible the shot may be, no matter what circumstance you find your health or your life facing, know that you can't figure it out. You can't go to someone who's going to tell you you need to do this or that. You need somehow to surrender to something much bigger that just grabs a hold of you, grabs hold of that ball, and makes the shot. And all you can do is be in a state of ecstatic awe, saying, I have no idea what happened, because that's life making you happen. And it feels like bliss, and you don't even have to follow it. It's going to grab hold of you and take you on the ride of your life.
You know, Hillary, I just can't help but wonder, what is it like for the two of you living together?
Well, it's wonderful. I have the extreme pleasure of, as some of the listeners know, and Brad spent many, many years with the opportunity to experience traditional healing cultures all around the world, and part of our crazy mission and work is recognizing the similar threads that run through these different traditions and trying to bring them into our contemporary times and into our current lifestyles. And I would say that this is where it's beautiful, because two people can together do everything they can to just bring more Seiki and bring more life force and bring more ecstatic experience into their life together.
Yeah, our life is a Broadway musical. I mean, we don't begin the day without an overture, and we're filled with all kinds of acrobatic acts and crazy surprises and nonsense, and there's no reason we should consider living anything less than the most extraordinary production on a Broadway stage. So we love living it, and we love inviting others to move into what we call non-psychological living, and instead step into the three-ring circus of ecstatic living. So we're all about that. And
absolutely, which includes more play and more humor and just generally taking everything less seriously, especially in those times when, as Brad said, things have got you down or you're facing some serious issues and you're bankrupted. And those are the exact times that you need to turn to the life force, that which brings more life, that which brings more play, more music into your life.
I'm certain that also through your experience as well is that you've watched countless lives transformed in ways that probably just simply left you astounded.
Absolutely. We have, in many of our books, we write many of the case stories of clients that we've worked with, and many of them we share in the book Seiki Jutsu. But it's really our privilege and our joy to work with many as people as possible. We work all over the world. We work in Europe and Budapest and Austria and Mexico, as Brad said, and the United States. And it's really incredible. People from all ages, all walks of life, whose lives have really been fed and nurtured and transformed by having a relationship to Seiki, which, as Brad said, brings us out of the straitjacket of psychological living and brings us into a much wider landscape that we like to call ecstatic living.
Mm-hmm. So Stephen Jobs was certainly right when he simply said, you realize that the world around you was built by people and rules are made up by rules of people that are no better than you are, and that when you finally understand that you'll just be astounded.
Yeah, it is astonishing.
It is, and another way to say it, that life is always changing. And that, of course, sounds like a simple kind of cliched thing to say. People say, oh, I know, the only constant is change. But we often forget this in our daily living, that we are in the midst of constant change. And instead of fighting that or trying to figure it out or trying to always rely on reasoning to choose the best way, we can become free to step into that change and become a changing person. So with Seiki, we recognize that there is no particular rule, whether or not there's a particular diet you think you should follow or a particular practice or a daily regimen or a particular thing you should say or not say or believe. Seiki comes full of life and complexity to replace all of that more narrow way of thinking. And we find when we do that, both body, mind, soul, creativity just becomes a fountain of ongoing change.
Well, it's been a true pleasure to have both of you here on the program today, and I know in closing what I would like, if you can, is why don't we share with the listeners the beginning of a simple practice of how they can get started toward experiencing what Seiki Jutsu is all about.
Absolutely, and I'll mention, too, that for listeners out there who want to see what Seiki Jutsu looks like, we have some videos on YouTube that are also linked through our website that show both the Seiki practice and also some of the hands-on work. But we'd be happy right now to do a little Seiki introduction.
Absolutely.
So doesn't matter where any listener is, doesn't matter if they're sitting in a chair or standing, but we just take a moment, sit up straight, make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath. And the traditional way is to press gently on your eyeballs in the corner of your eyes, and this is kind of just a little way to tell your body that it's time to start. And then, without any effort, just experience yourself sitting empty, effortlessly in space. And then you have two choices. One, you can wait until a movement begins to let your body sway. Or instead of waiting for that to come on, you can just go ahead and give yourself a little wiggle. Give yourself a little shake. Sometimes we like to turn on some blues music.
That's right.
Influenced as we are by New Orleans. And allow your body to just simply rock back and forth.
You need to rock and move.
Or bob up and down.
Put yourself in a position to get caught. However you want to say it. By life, or by holiness, or by mystery. And you find yourself a moving, you're going to find rhythm. That rhythm's a train, a rhythm train. It's going to take you outside of your brain and help you drain away all the things in the way so you can shoot the impossible shot. You can find the impossible spot. You can draw a dot right over your heart and say, I need to be struck so my heart can open and fall in love with everything in my life.
That's right.
That's all it is. It's just getting out of the way. Being a child again, because you rocked and rolled when you were a child, always putting yourself into naturalistic trances. So we're saying, go back to that. Don't listen to the old school teachers who said, sit still, get up and move, and feel. And all kinds of things are going to happen. All kind of surprises. And that's what it means to wake up, not a trance, but a living dance. Seiki Jutsu, art of living with the non-subtle life force, which is to say, the art of being fully alive, electrified, plugged in. Everybody needs a little Ray Charles moving inside their soul. Everybody needs the rhythm train to take them home. And then when the train says we're home again,
then you can allow your body to vibrate and wiggle and just move and rock back into itself. And here you don't have to know what to do. All you need to remember is that your body contains a wisdom. And remember that your body includes your heart, it includes all your feelings, it even includes your brain. There's nothing to know. Here you're taking a recess from willpower and conscious purpose. No matter what your body is at this moment, it doesn't matter if you're full of health, it doesn't matter if you're full of sickness, whatever it is, you can just feel that Seiki circulate, either fast or slow. And the more you do this, the more you will be surprised that your body will tell you in many different ways, through sensations or thoughts or sounds that bubble up inside you, what it needs, what your life needs.
Take a drink of the fountain of youth. Jump into the fountain of youth. Did you know that I'm 80,000 years old? Even though I only look like I'm 20,000 years old. How about you?
It doesn't matter how old you are, or how young you are, or how you feel. What has always been available to you is this pure, unadulterated, free-flowing relationship with life. And it is inseparable from the spiritual current, from the heart current that flows, whether you're looking to the eyes of your grandchild or sitting with your favorite cat in your lap Anything that moves the heart moves the body. Anything that moves the body moves the heart and brings us, as we like to say, into the Seiki River. So it's time for a new kind of baptism in the oldest waters, even flow through the desert of the Kalahari, all the way through ancient Japan, down through New Orleans, and even into the desert of Arizona. So wherever you are right now, welcome to plugging in to the Seiki River.
And all of this is to say, just do nothing. Do nothing. That's gonna be really something for you to go back to doing nothing. Thank you for celebrating life with us today, remembering all those picture shows, all the wisdom from movies, and the things that happen to us as children need to infuse themselves into our life. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is Seiki Jutsu coming in at number 1 at Beyond 50's Top 40. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis, and we're going to allow Bradford and Hillary to be able to share a website where people can find out more.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. Our website is www.keeneyinstitute.org. Our last name, Keeney, K-E-E-N-E-Y, keeneyinstitute.org.
And we'll look forward to you sending those links to your YouTube videos toward us so we can certainly shoot those out. Also to our Twitter audience as well so they can find out, boy, you need to listen to the end of this particular show because you're not going to believe how much it's going to change your life. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, it's Seiki Jutsu. We're going to be sure that we have a little bit on our website so you can find out more about that and how you can find out more to practice and get into this ancient flow of life. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.